Good morning, everybody. We are here in Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs, and it is, welcome everybody, and it is February 4th, shockingly enough, and we are missing a member, I understand, and Heidi, and we will hopefully be up to 4 shortly, but we have a quorum, and so we're going to start. We're going to begin this week addressing additional pieces of really following up on our work of the last 2 years. We're going to follow up and get updates on how the Home Act and Act 181 are actively being put in practice, and what's happening as a result of all the work that we passed in the last 2 years. So we're going to begin, and would you kind of touch that blue thing that says "okay" above your head?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. And so to begin our update on these 2 important pieces of work, we have Katie Galler from the Vermont Natural Resources Council. Well, it's good to have you. And do you know everybody in our committee? I know you know 3 of us, but have you also met Thomas?
We have, yes. That's great to see you again.
Okay, great. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Chair Clarkson and members of the committee. So as was just described, my plan for this morning is to go through, while we have a good amount of time, still a relatively high level update of both what we passed, and your committees worked very hard to pass over the past 2 years with the Home Act and Act 181. So I'm sure a lot of this will be familiar to you already. And then kind of where we're standing today and where we're at. And so again, my name is Katie Gallagher. I direct the Sustainable Communities Program with the Vermont Natural Resources Council, which is a statewide environmental advocacy organization. And in that work, I focus primarily on sustainable land use planning and development. So that's working both here in the building, but also with municipalities and providing direct support and working with partners to figure out what's happening on the ground and how we can be most supportive. And in my nighttime life, I am also on the Waterbury Planning Commission and our Housing Task Force. And so in addition to my day job, I'm also deeply familiar with these issues from how we've been able to implement them in Waterbury and really benefit from a lot of this work. So excited to talk to you all about it today. And before we dive in, I just want to kind of step back and note why I am here from an environmental organization talking about housing. And that is because we deeply believe that housing is a climate and environmental solution. It's really important to our entire landscape and our ability to have thriving communities from an environmental perspective, just as much as a social and economic one. So that's why I'm here, and I don't need to tell you all why housing is important other than that. So just to step back a little bit, because I think it's helpful to frame this conversation and really was a driving force behind both of these 2 pieces of legislation. Vermont has statewide planning goals that are in statute within Chapter 117. I just pulled out a couple of the ones that I think are really relevant for this conversation up top here. But really what we're trying to achieve in all of our land use planning is to maintain Vermont's historic settlement pattern of compact village and urban centers separated by rural countryside. And just want to note there that as we've been experiencing flooding and other extenuating circumstances in recent years in particular, what we mean by historic settlement patterns is not necessarily that same very tiny geographic location where we had our main street, but in general, those same kinds of compact areas that provide for walkability and access to jobs and services with homes, with businesses close to each other, transportation options, things like that. This is the first time
I recall hearing it phrased as rural countryside instead of working lands. I think there's a difference, but I'm not sure if I'm missing a quote directly from the chapter 117 text, because I often have tried to remind Senate Agriculture, this was created for you. And as food security and timber security becomes a question mark in Vermont, I just want to make sure we still remember that Act 250 was to keep our lands working.
Yes. Yes, I think that's
That's
absolutely
a current use. I mean, those
Correct.
two. in
right. Yeah, so the rural countryside is the language that's in chapter 117, but I think in my interpretation of it, and as we see in some of the specific points that are pulled out, strong agriculture and forest industries, it certainly I would say I understand it as the working landscape, and generally that's the terminology that I use.
Yeah.
Right.
So yes, just this graphic here is kind of planner favored imagery of what this transect looks like. Obviously, for us in Vermont, that urban core zone is not quite as urban as it is in a lot of places, but the theory kind of holds the same across our rural communities. So why these goals are important? There's, again, a whole lot of different reasons. Why we are coming at it from this perspective is, one, to your point, Senator, is that it helped to protect our rural communities, both in their character and the ability to have viable working land, especially for farms that are increasingly at risk of becoming subdivided, thank you, and our forests as well. And we know as well from an affordability perspective that having land use regulations, particularly through our zoning, that requires large lots and single family homes that are further out from our community centers, actually increases costs for our households. It increases costs for our municipalities in terms of the infrastructure that they need to build and maintain. And it harms our environment by breaking up those resources, by undermining our wetlands and other, ecological resources that are now protecting us from the worst impacts of climate change and the biodiversity loss that we're facing. And on the other hand, we know that these more dense, mixed-use, walkable neighborhoods, which again are very common throughout our state already, are more affordable for Vermonters. They're more sustainable and allow us, all of our neighbors that have different income levels and abilities to live fully, which I just want to note is really critical as we talk about having an aging population and actually providing for communities that meet their needs. This graphic is very old and blurry, but essentially just kind of trying to illustrate the point that this is not, this is in large part about how we design our communities. So we're still trying to build housing, we are still trying to build communities, but the way in which we do it, so on the left, the more clustered design, than on the right, can help us to achieve these widespread and interconnected goals.
This might be a question for the planners. When I'm thinking about walkable, and all of a sudden that's standing out to me in a new way, because a lot of us live in areas that have spats over sidewalks. And we have, not being in transportation, maybe I haven't heard lately about our complete streets work. And any time that we are changing any infrastructure of a road, it used to be our goal to have a sidewalk and a bike path, is my understanding, sort of put in, without, in my mind, local zoning being able to supersede that and not put an accessible, pedestrian friendly infrastructure. Do you know where that is right now?
maybe Charlie and Catherine, when they testify later, can address that. If there's an update on complete streets, because I think actually we didn't do much on it last.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really great question. And just from my perspective, and I do work a lot in the transportation committees as well.
Good.
We have not gotten very far with our
Yeah.
streets.
I think last year there was major disappointment about lack of progress in that.
Yeah, and I will say the Agency of Transportation is currently undergoing a multi-year process to update our state. We've had different names for what it's called, but our state road design standards, which has been one barrier. It was innovative when these standards were passed, and it's been many, many years. And those have been a real barrier, especially for our rural communities, to do things like adding, maybe it's not a full sidewalk, but some kind of path for people to get to places along businesses. I know some communities have, talk about this forever, so I'll get into it. But all that to say, so the complete streets, our understanding is that the intention is that there will be a further update to that as perhaps in a year or two, kind of as part of this broader redesign of the state standards, part of which is really exciting because the consultants that are currently working on this plan are trying to make the standards more context sensitive so that they're actually being aligned with the Act 250 tiers and our designated areas to say this isn't just the same kind of road that's going through or leading into our town center. It's a town center road, essentially, and so it should be granted kind of different flexibility and different design standards.
Right, we look forward to that.
Senator Chin and I will work on that outside of committee.
Well, and there's lots of support for that complete streets work, but in the House Transportation and now in our current transportation committee.
There is, and it's certainly just, I think, part and parcel of the conversation of needing to increase capacity of municipalities to implement this work because so much of it comes down to the towns.
Yeah.
Randy.
Just a common observation. I know we've moved in recent years to a great extent towards this kind of concept, the dense mixed use flow. Not everybody subscribes to that. And I just wonder the extent to which there's been public input that either says, hey, we really are excited about that, or we don't want to be locked up in a densely constructed neighborhood with everybody looking through our windows. And that there are substantial numbers of abutters, frankly, want to breathe free.
I think that you're absolutely right. That's why a lot of people move to Vermont is because they want that
New
space.
Jersey.
Right. What we've seen from our research and talking with partners and looking into the data that we do have available is that we're building single family homes that are in our more spacious areas. What we're trying to address here is the fact that we have and in many towns made it illegal to build more densely. So that's the first thing. And then secondly, it's trying to make it feasible for these places to be built. You don't want to live there, you don't have to. But a lot of, for example, we work very closely with AARP Vermont, and this is a major focus of theirs. And it kind of achieves our multiple goals because if we have older Vermonters who want to downsize and want to be in a place where they're closer to services and social connections, if they have a place where they can move to, where we know right now that they very often don't have that place, then they're leaving their larger single family home that's now open for somebody else to move into.
And I just say, and we'll hear this more from Catherine and Charlie, but this is for me, the plus of ground up tier planning. Every town is checking off and engaged in where they want to develop and how they want to develop. And that to me is exciting that that hopefully by the end of this process, December 26th, we're holding your toes to the fire on this, Charlie. that every town will be clear on where they want to do this. But living in the center of a town, I would say also young people who want to have their children walk to school are really keen on not having to drive teenagers all the time and be in the car all the time. People want to be in walkable communities, both for safety, for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah, and the,
Well, as we say, people want to, I think I say some people.
Yeah, I think people
And
want to
some
go to
don't.
different
And my
places.
question and concern only
Right.
is that we make sure that we create a process that allows for that flexibility, as opposed to a process that channels people into a single use solution.
Right, and we are, because that is what town planning is enabling in this whole process. So our time is short this morning, so I'd love to keep you, because we also have Peter, and then we'll move to
Yeah.
Charlie.
So just very quickly, I just pulled out this chart comparing my town of Waterbury Village and Waterbury Center and the importance of when we're talking about housing. It's also really important to talk about location and transportation and how that comes into play. So most people are familiar with the Waterbury Village, that's our downtown, our main street, more compact development compared to Waterbury Center, where we do have a village center. This is where I live, but you can see on the right-hand side here, just the significant increase in transportation costs, our reliance on vehicles, et cetera. So not to get into it, but just that location really matters in terms of our cost. Just another.
And our environmental impact.
Absolutely. Yeah. This was a report that VTrans put out this past year. That's just a couple more numbers, if you're interested in looking into them, but compared the differences both related to vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions, but also these other kind of key components to impacts related to smart growth. So on the left-hand side, this is concentrated growth and balanced land use scenario as compared to our dispersed growth. And you can see that it also has impacts in relation to traffic deaths and injuries, physical inactivity, maintenance costs, and road miles. So there's a lot that goes into this.
That's great.
Yes, and they have a really cool interactive map.
Oh,
Yeah.
That's right up.
Yeah. So getting into what we actually did. So first with the Home Act, this was a really exciting bill because, as I said, we just in many of our towns have literally not allowed many types of homes to be built. So the Home Act really focused on promoting this small scale infill development, primarily in areas that have existing infrastructure. When we use terms like infill, generally what we're talking about are lots that are either vacant or underutilized, and trying to put in development that works for our small towns in particular. So just making it feasible for small scale developers. So bringing more people into that pool of those who can actually engage in building more housing units for our communities. So we did this through allowing higher density development, again, in these areas with municipal sewer and water service. We also allowed for duplexes. Wherever single family homes are allowed, you can now have a duplex. They can't be further constrained than a single family home. We reduced parking minimums. So this is again really important, especially for affordable housing, where a lot of towns have required somewhat arbitrary numbers of parking that aren't related to how much parking is actually needed for that project. And that takes up space, that costs money, that reduces the number of units that those developers are able to build. So that was a big success. We limited local appeals, particularly related to the use of the subjective character of the area criteria. And then we increased the triggering threshold for Act 250. We can get into more details if we want, but I'll leave it there for now. This was just a couple other images that I think are helpful. On the right, this is from the new Vermont Zoning Atlas, which if you haven't taken a look at, another fun mapping tool that we have, although it's already a little bit outdated. So this is, again, Waterbury. I am pleased to be able to report that we have since updated our zoning, so it's not quite as
Right.
bad as it looks here, but essentially what we're looking at is before that zoning was updated, the brighter yellow is showing where multifamily homes of 4 units or more were permitted uses. And it's basically just that little piece of Main Street and then a little block on either side here. And so just kind of highlighting why those zoning changes were needed so that we could actually move forward with larger projects, which we have in the past 2 years. And then on the left, these are 2 examples of infill development homes that come from the Homes for All toolkit that the Department of Housing and Community Development produced, another really fantastic resource that came out of this work and trying to encourage and provide technical support for the development of missing middle housing, which again, often really just fits in really nicely to our existing kind of small town Vermont context. I did just want to note before moving into Act 181 that there was a whole lot of reports that went into a lot of this work, and I'm sure this is not even all of them. But in the summer before Act 181, so 2023, we had the NRB report, necessary updates to Act 250. Before them in 2019, there was the report on the Commission of Act 250. 2023, again, we had the report looking at how to update the designation programs as well as VAPTA's report looking at regional planning, excuse me, the climate action plan, as well as a lot of other reports that were looking more specifically at some of those environmental questions. So all of these kind of came together to form a lot of the basis of Act 181. Which did a lot of things. The one thing that I think is so important that I like to start with is how it really overhauled our planning framework and brought together these 4 planning kind of mechanisms that we've had from the municipal level to our regional planning commissions, Act 250 and more of a regulatory component, and then our state designation program, more focused on investments. It brought these together to align them and make sure that we are more effectively directing our public investments to those areas, as Senator Clarkson mentioned, to the areas that our towns are deciding they want to see growth and where they want to see protection. The update to the designation program made it more accessible. At least the goal is to make it more accessible for smaller towns in particular to access non-regulatory benefits. So they are bringing in towns on a more automatic basis to kind of get a foothold onto the ladder so that they can then start with getting incentives like access to funding and tax credits that then will allow them, for example, to, maybe that helps with revitalizing the town center, and that attracts more developer interest. And so then they can bring in more housing, and then they might be eligible for the next step. So there's a lot of really exciting implications for doing this work. And you'll hear more about some more of what the planning looks like from Charlie and Catherine.
I so wanted this to be called Act 251 so I could remember the number. I asked the governor to hold it, but here we are. Act 181. I have to remember it.
Yeah.
It's good. The substance.
It's still there. Yeah. So other important pieces, it acknowledges the importance of while we're aligning our planning, we're promoting housing, which we'll talk more about in a second. It also is acknowledging the importance of protecting our working lands and our critical natural resources from low density sprawling development. I'm just sharing all the maps today because I love them. The American Farmland Trust produces this mapping resource. It's looking at 2016 as a baseline, so a little bit older now, but it showcases the difference between that baseline scenario. On the right is business as usual. You can also scale it up to runaway sprawl, but it shows the conversion of farmland to less low density development and just what that looks like in different parts of the state. And just on the left here, looking at it from a whole state perspective and just that difference of what low density development means for our farmland. And
This is the national map.
Mhm. It's incredible.
Can you send me that?
Yeah.
Well, I think we have it, but you mean the larger map, because
The
we have it.
interactive.
Yeah.
That would be great if you'd send it to all of us.
Sure.
And we could have it on actually on our page.
Another great resource comes from the Vermont Resources Council, which also has several different data points that you can play around with. But this one that I pulled out is looking at the percentage change in our parcel acreage between 2005 and 2020. So we can see on the left, this is the change in residential. So, generally increasing, probably not as much as we would like. But our farm and woodland acreage has really significantly decreased, and we can also share, more specific numbers with you about what that looks like in different places. But all that to say, we are increasing our consumption of land and impacting these resources at a higher rate than we're actually increasing our population.
Which has lots of implications.
Exactly. And that was a big part of what Act 181 was trying to address when we are moving Act 250 from a project size jurisdictional trigger to more context sensitive location based jurisdictional trigger. So we're doing that by moving to this tiered system. So tier 1, split between tier 1A and tier 1B are for our growth areas. Tier 3 would be looking at those most critical natural resource areas. And then tier 2 is kind of everything else in the middle. And it's more of that status quo.
We need to hire you to do our infographics.
Yeah,
It's a great.
Much better than we had last year.
this one has been shared around a lot.
Yeah, good.
So
Yes, question.
Yeah, tell us.
So I believe Commissioner Farrell suggested a change to a tier 1B, that third box, to make it an opt out. Do you have any thoughts or reactions to that?
correct. Yeah. So from VNRC's perspective, that's something that I think we want to look at a little bit more closely, but have not had a problem with that in the past. I think, to be honest, from my perspective, it's a little bit of a toss up in terms of, like towns opting in versus opting out, but I don't think it's a problem. So tier 1A areas, those are those that have kind of the most capacity for taking over Act 250 jurisdiction, and they would be granted a full exemption for residential, commercial, and industrial projects. Tier 1B would be kind of more of those village center areas. So in my town of Waterbury, that's our Waterbury Center village center area where we have water, but less compact development. It's kind of still on that ladder of getting up there, but we would be exempt for residential and mixed use projects with up to 50 units, which in both cases would be really significant for our town. And then again, tier 2, generally status quo with the addition of the road rule, with the intention of reducing sprawl and fragmentation. I think we should probably rename that to be like long driveway rule or something. And then tier 3, I think just important to note that this doesn't really do a whole lot in the way that the law is currently written, because it is left to rulemaking to decide whether and how Act 250 should be used to protect certain natural resources, which are also still to be determined. Another important change related to governance is that it replaces the Natural Resource Board with the Land Use Review Board. And this new board is professionalized. So as opposed to the previous board, which was essentially volunteer-based, the new board is 5 full-time professional members. I think 3 out of the 5 of them have planning experience, so that's also really exciting. And they can help leave it to Pete if you want to talk more to that, but there's a lot of, I think, exciting work that comes from that professionalizing of the board. And then again, the act requires several different studies to determine both how we promote affordable housing. There's an affordable housing study that just came out a couple weeks, a month, wherever we are, early January.
Like forever.
Yeah. As well as how we deal with tier 2 and tier 3. So still lots of work to be done.
And Lord was doing the permitting work of that we gave them to come back to us with how we update our Act 250 permitting appeals.
The appeals, correct. And I have a
Because
slide
the
on that.
appeal, yeah,
So this is very, very rough kind of eligibility of tier 1 towns. We still haven't had a great way to map this out yet, in part because of the flexibility of how towns can get there. This is showing, and I'm sorry, I forgot to include the legend here, but it's showing towns that have zoning and subdivision. Those would be the full kind of crossed towns and towns with zoning or subdivision bylaws. And then you can't see here, but I put the numbers here. Excuse me, we have 89% of our towns already have public water or wastewater. A third have both, but the other eligibility criteria is soils that are adequate for compact development. And if I put that on the map, it would kind of just turn black because the majority of our towns have adequate soils. And generally those do also overlap with where the smaller village centers and compact areas are.
right.
So then we have our interim exemptions for housing. So recognizing that there's going to be several years to go through these planning processes and actually implement the changes to Act 250, we wanted to make sure that there was these exemptions in place to get housing in place quicker. So you can see the list. Another great map, if you haven't gone to it yet, that showcases where these potential exemptions would be located. So again, on the right is what those exact numbers are and when they sunset.
Is this a state map?
This is a state map that the NRB produced. LRB.
Collaboratively.
Yeah. But
I'm so glad you're pointing out to hopefully the public early that we have maps.
There are
We have
maps.
lots
Yeah.
of maps.
Lots of maps.
But every town, I hope, as they go through this process, will chat with Charlie, have access to all this ability to do this work as they envision their future.
And so just to put it together as to what this could look like, and this is in Katie's imagining of for Waterbury here. It's kind of close to our interim exemption maps because we already know where our growth centers are. But those tier 1 areas could be expanded. They are not limited to those prior existing designated areas. So for example, our sewer service expands up into Colbyville and we have development up there. And so we probably, I would guess, want to expand our tier 1 area to encompass that area as well. Our tier 1B area, again, has some development that extends and, make it make sense for that location. So that's
Makes sense.
the idea.
And you have a major road where it makes sense for development.
Right.
To go, but not just Route 7, but there's lots of that route, whatever it is. That goes through you up to Stowe.
Route 100.
Route 100.
Yeah. And we want to avoid going all along Route 100
Right.
and then probably I'll just, okay, but.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So what about field?
I'm going to actually propose that, and I know you have a few more slides. I'm going to propose we shorten our break, given we didn't start till 10, because Pete needs time to do his work as well. So before we start with, so we may have a short-ish break at 5:11.
Okay, I'll go really quickly. So just wanted to point out that that we have addressed appeals in a couple of different ways, and I know that this has been a topic of interest. So in Act 181, we further amended appeals, particularly for zoning to facilitate housing, increase the number of people needed to appeal a decision from 10 to 20, sets a goal for the environmental division to issue decisions within 90 days after a hearing, and prioritizes funding for municipalities to implement zoning and subdivision regulations if they do not have them, which I think is a really key component. We also have in place a study that will be due on January 1st of 2026.
Are you sure that's the date? I thought it was February. We can,
Sorry, which,
Sorry, the appeal study.
yeah, that's, I believe that's the end of this year, beginning of,
okay, we'll double check.
Yeah.
But it'll be in time for us to work on next year. Yeah.
So this is looking at the Act 250 appeals processes, but it also includes specifically, it calls out how to deal with appeals for housing projects and facilitate that process. So where we are now, there's a whole lot more on the Land Use Review Board's timeline that goes into the Act 181 implementation, but I pulled out what was kind of most relevant for the housing conversation. So we have our interim exemptions in place going to different points in 2027. The other kind of big piece here is the adoption of the regional plan. So you'll hear more about that, but that is due to be completed by the end of 2026. And then there's a whole lot of other things that are happening within there, but this is kind of the big picture in terms of timeline over the next 2 years. And just want to note that according to what we're hearing, we're on the right track. There was another article out this morning about a project in Middlebury that was able to take advantage of these policies to build start building a really significant housing project. As I noted, the bottom right image is that housing development dashboard, another fantastic mapping resource that is highlighting just the new multifamily units that we've been able to build in the past couple of years, again, as a result of these policies. And then in the right, this is housingdata.org, another fantastic resource led by Vermont Housing Finance Agency, showing increase in multifamily units and single family homes over the past couple of years. And I won't get into this, but just recognizing that there's more left to do. We think that we have started a really strong foundation for moving forward with building housing in the places that make sense. But there's plenty of next steps. So
Well,
happy to talk more about that, but I'll leave it there for now.
Great. Thank you, Keisha.
Senator Weeks made a great point in sort of musing with us how we move forward, and it doesn't matter that he's not here to hear this question. I hope he appreciates it. I think we're trying to make sure that we feel settled on the number of homes we do need to meet the moment. I think you saw more VHFA and ACCD put forward a range because they are recognizing that environmental and political climate change are likely to have people wanting to move here at the rate they did during the pandemic. And so I'm just wondering if, VNRC as our major, very valuable environmental stakeholder in this conversation is in general agreement with that number. You don't have to answer that now if you need to go back and talk to the team. But, I think we want to make sure we've asked that question. So we all start to say, like, if we're serious about the amount of housing we need, this is the number and we're driving towards it.
Mm-hmm. We have not discussed exactly whether we're like in total agreement with that number. I think mostly because we haven't done that research, and that's a whole big process that they've undergone. I think our position is we know that we need a lot of housing, and we are not that close to meeting those goals. And so there's a lot more that we can be doing to help meet those numbers. And
Yeah, and I really appreciate it. I couldn't make it because my mornings are often busy, but I don't know if this was part of the presentation at the VNRC
Mhm.
morning
Part of
coffee.
it, part of it.
I
What she's at.
appreciate that was your first event. That just feels like a great partnership between our group. That's smart growth in
Yeah.
action.
And smart work together. Thank you for this. More to follow because we'll be addressing many of these things in our housing bill that we hope we will be developing together. So thank you, Katie. And I think this is a great moment to pivot to Peter. And Peter, why don't you switch places with Katie and or join Katie, pull your chair if you want. Katie, thank you. That was a perfect tee off. And who is this?
So we have Janet Hurley, that's the chair of the Land Use Review
Okay.
Board. So I thought it would be great to have her join us as well. This.
We're really doing LERB, aren't we? We have to make a piece of it.
We are, sorry.
That's okay. And can we just raise your volume a bit?
Let's see.
I did.
My volume is up all the way. So,
You're perfect. It's on our end. We just did.
oh, okay.
So Peter, and introduce yourself.
Yeah, so Pete Gill, I'm the executive director for the Land Use Review Board as of January 1 under Act 181. And we have with us Janet Hurley, the chair of the board.
For a month. You've been.
And
Very
so
exciting.
as of January, that was the start under the legislation. The actual physical seating of the board was Monday of last week. So they are drinking from the fire hose and getting up to speed on as much as possible. I will say that the board as a whole has got some great expertise. As Katie mentioned, we've got three planners. Which is going to be a great asset to our team. They're a working board. They're paid professionals. They're part of our staff in that way, and they are integrated into our group that way.
So just before you start, Janet, you probably haven't met any of us, or at least I don't think you have. So why don't we just introduce ourselves?
Sure, thank you.
Hi, Janet, I'm Tom Chittenden. I represent Chittenden Southeast, 11 communities in the southeast of Chittenden County.
I can see half your face, Tom. Can you? There you are. Hi,
Oh, you just
thank
turned
you.
it. Great. Perfect.
Are we good? Are we good on faith? Okay.
We're good on your.
Senator Acacia Ram Hinsdale, Chittenden Southeast. I was the chair of this committee when we wrote this legislation, and I have been asked by others if I'm going to be invited in to speak to you all about its intent. I understand you had the other committee of jurisdiction in, but this was just as much a proposal about housing and economic development as it was about protecting open space and ecological integrity. So I look forward to hopefully seeing you all at one of your meetings soon.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to have you.
Heidi.
Hi, I'm Heidi Parker. I'm a new committee assistant at the State House.
No, she's as seasoned as you are, Janet.
Yeah.
Allison Clarkson, I represent the Windsor District.
And I'm Randy Brock. I represent Franklin County and Northern Grand Isle County.
Right. So I know we have a short time.
We have
but
a
at
short
least
time
we are.
and I'll say, just preparatory. I wasn't sure if I was here more as a resource. So I was kind of preparing in that way, but I did write down a couple of things that I think would be helpful for this committee, kind of set some of the stage, let you know kind of what's happening.
Update and follow up.
and
It's sort
kind
of
of
where we
an
are right now.
Yeah, and happy to come back in at any time, especially once the LERB has its feet on the ground a little bit more too. Certainly, they have been working hard to onboard in the last week plus. and just understanding new systems of state government, et cetera. So I will just say that in terms of a couple of updates, we have had some significant outreach over the course of the summer. The board at the time, we did 10 or more outreach events to various groups across the state, connecting with folks in person and online seminars as well, working with our partners at the regional planning commissions, as well as ACCD and the municipalities, giving folks from developers to municipal officials, to planners, the kind of 101 nuts and bolts of Act 181 and how those pieces intersect and where they, depending on the particular constituent group, how they interact and fold into 181 and how it works.
I'd just love to hear your overall philosophy and approach to this work as a new board. In my mind, part of our intent was that, ultimately someone would know that there's an intended land use of a parcel. And once that's no longer in question, there'd be a lot more certainty about what can be done there. And there wouldn't be a lot of questions about the density, the number of units, et cetera, that, details obviously matter at the municipal level, but we get out of then determining beyond that, the same level of detail at the LURB. It would become a question of, this is the land use, and that's now a settled question until there's a big question raised about that.
I think that's very true. I will punt this one to you, Janet, but I will just prefatory say that, just the board as a whole has not had a chance to really talk about policy and how they approach this legislation. They've certainly individually siloed thought about these things and are again very well versed in the issues and have expertise in this area.
Great. And Janet, when you answer that, if you could talk about your environmental justice expertise on the board and how you're folding that into your work.
So as Pete mentioned, or as Katie mentioned, there are 3 planners. There's also a land use attorney with decades of experience and a district coordinator who's also an engineer. So I think the board does have a breadth of experience that will work well toward meeting the mandates of Act 181. To address the environmental justice, I wouldn't say that we have particular expertise, but we certainly have a commitment to ensuring that the rules that we will be forming are reflective of fairness to various environmental focus communities, but also everybody equally. So I have taken on that. We, as Pete mentioned, we sort of siloed ourselves into various aspects of the work that we need to do because of the open meeting law requirements. It's going to be really difficult for us to work together in any capacity without triggering the open meeting law. We can't really move forward. So at this point, we've sort of siloed that work. And when decisions need to be made as we make progress, we will bring it to an open meeting and make decisions. So, and at this point, we really haven't made policy decisions, as Pete mentioned, other than to say that we do see that we have a task laid out for us, and we're not going to weigh in on the big policy questions that you're faced with after the governor presented his omnibus housing bill in terms of whether there should be a tier 3, whether there should be a road rule, whether there should be 8C rulemaking. We're moving forward as the law is written
with the law draft. And so I would just underscore for your next agenda to make sure you have one of the architects. I mean, our whole committee was architect, but our lead architect was Keisha. I encourage you to hear.
Yeah, that,
Oh, fine.
um, we are, we're taking our board on a little bit of a roadshow, and we are planning on meeting in Essex Junction next week on the 10th. I don't know if that's something that you could possibly attend and speak at, Senator, but
Why don't you do that offline and that?
yeah, we can talk about that. So, I'm sorry, I'm sort of lost. I was talking about the board.
Environmental justice, who was taking.
Right, right. And so I've taken that on with Sarah Had a little bit as a backup. As Pete mentioned, it has been a little bit like a fire hose, drinking from a fire hose in the last week. So we haven't necessarily made measurable progress on anything yet. So, other than perhaps the forest, the wood products manufacturing study, which was started before we came on board. And so that's something that we talked about at our open meeting yesterday, and do see that there is progress on that particular work task.
Right. I think I would put a plug in, given our concern and interest in the appeals process and updating it, that you get to work on that work
Yeah.
right away, because we're very much wanting to make that a piece of our work this time.
Yeah. Yeah, Brooke Dingledine is working on that. She's the former land use attorney, now board member. And we are going to have we're going to have regular meetings on Monday afternoons, and Brooke can provide an update. We're going to have updates from each of us at those meetings. So I don't know exactly where Brooke is yet. I presume she's working on trying to establish that stakeholder group.
Great, thanks.
I do just want to say, I mean, Brooke, at one point in Senate Finance, said about solar siting, I'm sorry there wasn't a Black person that was impacted, and maybe if there was, this would be considered an environmental injustice. It was a really concerning statement. So I really think you all need to shore up your environmental justice understanding sooner than later. I would recommend starting with Carla Raimondi in Agency of Natural Resources, but this is really serious part of the bill, how you distribute the benefits, and don't just recreate maps based on who has power and money to push things out of their sightline, et cetera. So I'm a little concerned that isn't part of the conversation already.
Right. Can we talk offline, Senator, about scheduling some discussions around that
Sure.
Great.
with the full board?
Yes.
Thank you.
Did you?
I was just going to add in on the environmental justice side of things. There has been continuity, and there will continue to be continuity between the Natural Resources Board and the new LURB. Obviously, with a week and a half, they haven't had, or feels like a week and a half. It's only been a week and a day. The opportunity to get up to speed on all the different avenues. We do have a representative on the Interagency Environmental Justice Committee. As part of the EJ law, and so we've been engaged in that process, and we'll make sure that there is representation and feedback between that representative and the board on those issues, because they are important issues and intersect with how their overall work will progress.
And I just got invited to a meeting on Friday afternoon in that regard. And I think those are regular meetings to some degree. And I hope to be part of those going forward.
I mean, I really don't want to let this go, in the sense that I had the color of law on the shelf for the last 2 years as
I
we
think
wrote
it's still
this
here,
bill.
or did you take it home?
I probably took it home because I do refer to it often. And we had a lot of conversation about how planners have, in the name of progress or in the name of protecting, some interest or another, have been complicit in creating this housing crisis, have been complicit in bulldozing over low-income communities and communities of color. So I just want to, I want to make sure that's really highlighted in the public sphere. We're glad we have planners on there, and planners have huge responsibility to educate themselves on how the profession has also been harmful to many marginalized communities.
Absolutely. Yep.
Great. And I would like to propose that we not take a break, given that and have Pete finish, because I know you have a couple other thoughts. You have like 4 or 5 minutes just to
5 minutes?
Yeah,
We
and
can-
then
we can
we'll
do
have you
that.
back.
We can
But
do
I
that.
think, I think given how late we started, I'm fine. Are you okay if we don't take a break? Okay, great.
And I will just, I want to just hammer one more time the open meeting law and kind of the unintended consequences that I think you heard a little bit about how that works. So there's obviously the practical pieces and challenges with setting that up. But I think with a working board that we have, they've got this great expertise, and we want to make sure that they can collaborate and work in that environment and get things done in an efficient manner, because there's a lot of quick deadlines, and want to make sure that
And you're thinking that the open meeting law is an impediment to that?
I think there are there are certainly practical challenges for the board in a unique circumstance. I think, if you look at it from like, maybe it's PUC might be one of the only other kind of examples where you have sort of a quasi judicial board that is kind of uniquely situated this way.
And you are considered a quasi judicial board.
We are, they have obligations that way. Yeah.
Yes, you do. And so this is actually a consideration you need to take up with Senate Government Operations.
Yes,
And
yes. And we
So,
certainly will.
As I
Wanted
serve
to
on both on
mention
that committee as well, I'm happy to chat with you about that. And we should meet with the chair of that.
Excellent. Would love to do that. A couple other things just to kind of give you guys updates. As Katie mentioned, we've got the interim housing exemptions. We have been rolling through those since they started. We did a lot of outreach early on to make sure that individuals were aware of the resources. We also developed those resources. So we worked with our partners to create those interim housing exemption maps so that folks could go on to those, look down to the parcel and see what color is it, how does it match up. Talk to your district coordinator, get further information on whether that applies or not. So I think we've done a pretty good job on that. We also had a companion guidance document that was essentially just a checklist that said, hey, here's the things that you need to meet from the legislation. Go through and check it. At the end of the day, how you end up. So trying to make those things as straightforward and clear to folks. In implementing that, we've had 50 some odd inquiries about that. That ranges from, hey, we're thinking about maybe doing a particular project at some undetermined point in the future, and we want to know more about these, to, hey, we've pretty much got the shovel on the ground. Are we where we need to be location wise in terms of these exemptions? With that whole gamut, we have about 1,600 plus or minus units that would be built if all of those would come to fruition under those exemptions.
Will you keep us up to date with those?
We're
We're very keen on knowing what is happening, what's moving forward on a number of bases.
with the caveat that that is probably as accurate as we can get with our particular information. We are kind of using the best available information that we have. As you recall, there's not a requirement for a jurisdictional opinion on these, so we don't know for sure what else is out there. Could be higher, could be lower.
But it would be great for their, and I don't know who the sort of who we can ask to track the interim exemption projects that actually come to fruition, because I think we're very keen on knowing what they are and where they are. And so
there is that. Yeah,
who would be
Katie
the
had
right
mentioned the housing.
to ask.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, we can talk about it.
Okay, great, Charlie.
Great.
Anything
Um,
else before we shift?
You know, the board, like I said, the board is kind of assessing the different technical corrections, et cetera. There are certainly things that would be helpful for the overall operations of the board. I don't want those to get missed in the mix of everything. Certainly on the policy side, that's, the board is, you know, not at a point where it can really, discuss those and think about those, yet.
Right. So,
Yeah.
great. This is terrific. Up and running. Janet, welcome. And
Thank you.
you are really hitting the ground running. More to follow, and then you and I should follow up with Brian Collmore. Because that would be great. Pete, thank you very much. And Katie, thank you for this tee up to Charlie and Catherine. So we're just gonna shift seats and maybe we can pull in a second seat. Thomas. Thomas.
What do you want me to do with?
Tyler, you are an intern. I'm gonna ask you to go down to Senate Education and get another padded seat. Thank you. They stole our seats on Friday. We're stealing them back. And Senate Ed's on the right. Thanks.
We just remember.
Somebody said.
He's Senator Weeks.
He's Senator Weeks as intern. So
Like-
with David's not here. I know, I just said I'm on a good
I need to run out.
Take copies. Chris, I just had this, the new,
Tyler, thank you.
presentation. And I need to.
Just one person.
Thank you. Ray.
There's just a quick.
I read it, but that's.
Everything's working.
I understand why. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Well, you know, we needed this. Charlie and Catherine, welcome.
Hello.
We are, I don't know if Thomas is leaving us but he should be back, I hope.
You left his glasses, so.
Yeah, I'm sure we're all, after a certain age, dysfunctional without our classes. Welcome. It's wonderful to have you. And I don't think the three of us need to introduce ourselves to you. David Weeks is not here this morning, who I hope you'll have a chance to meet, or he probably have met in another capacity. You haven't met yet. Right. He's a great addition. And Thomas, you have met in other capacities.
Oh, yes.
Right. Okay. Yes, you have. Person.
And when Heidi comes back, I'll share presentation.
Heidi, we need you for sharing our presentation.
All right, I got new copies of presentation.
Oh, thank you very much.
I might have missed a moment where we could say, I don't need all these beautiful color handouts. I feel like that's a lot.
Great. We'll only make 5.
Okay,
So,
so let me do this one thing at a time. Let's see. Okay, so.
yeah.
It's not that side. It's kind of just blocking things. I'm just gonna take that seat. You're welcome.
Yeah.
No, we're just pull back.
All right, I might do it. I'm not gonna say no, I'm a mom.
Okay.
I'm not gonna say no.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I know. Great. And we got all that.
This side, good switch.
And you look great with the primula above you and all the lovely delicious things.
It's the new acronym, VAT.
Vermont Association of Planners. Planners. Catherine and Charlie, take it away.
All right.
Introduce yourselves and here we
So,
go.
hello, thank you for having us. I'm Catherine Dimitrick. I'm the Executive Director of Northwest Regional Planning Commission.
Yeah, and hi, Charlie Baker. I'm with the Cheney County Regional Planning Commission during the day, but we both are on kind of the board of the Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies and trying to coordinate this work on behalf of all the RPCs. So, so we're really here on behalf of all the RPCs, not our own two in particular, although we will get a little bit more into depth with probably Catherine's work.
Just to give you an example of how it's being implemented.
Right, and I can share examples of what we're
This is
doing.
what when
So we're gonna just do a quick introduction. That was probably more for Senator Weeks, so we'll go through that.
But David, remember that he'll watch this.
Oh,
So this is, he will get
Senator
it.
Weeks, this is still for you.
Right, this is still for David.
The introduction, I'll talk a little bit about our accountability, a little bit about our funding, and then spend most of the time on the Act 181. So just a few slides of introduction. So as you all know, RPCs provide staff support and technical assistance to towns and the state. We really serve that role in the absence of county government. We are political subdivision, so we are governmental entities, which the legislature has asked us to do a variety of things over the years, including the work on 181.
Well, we have delegated important work to you.
And this, again, I'll cover this quickly because I think most of you have some familiarity with a lot of the range of our work, which goes from transportation planning, the land use planning we're talking about here, the housing we're talking about here, brownfields we've talked about in this committee before. In other committees, water quality, hazard mitigation, economic development, of course, and energy planning are the primary areas that we work in. As I think we'd like to think about it, it's just all the place-based work. So all the place-based agencies, DEC or A&R, VTrans, Commerce, Public Service are really the agencies that we work with. So who the heck are the RPCs? There are 11 RPCs. We have about 135 staff. So we are kind of like, yes, they thought about us collectively. We are like another department of the state government. Last year, we helped 113 communities help grant writing. And we really try to supplement the town staff. If they don't have enough staff, we can step in and help supplement. Governance. Towns,
So let's put a pin on that committee, and as we look at project-based, TIF Spark, as we look at brownfields, and we look at some big projects that our smaller towns just don't have the capacity to deal with.
Exactly.
So just put a pin in that tech.
And to follow up on that point, we really work for the towns. The towns make up our boards. They appoint our board members. Our boards approve our budgets and set policy and program priorities, including approving our regional plans. The executive director, so each of us reports to us executive committee of our board, who's responsible for the oversight of the executive director. And each RPC has a little bit of different variation in terms of the committees that they have, but they all have committees that provide recommendations that advise up to the board. Transportation, very typical. We all have clean water committees. Some sort of permit regulatory review to review Act 250 permits is pretty typical. And then a regional plan committee is pretty typical. Funding. So this is always, I often talk about when I'm introducing or orienting a new board member, like that we work like a public sector consulting agency. We have no general tax revenue. We have no ability to raise taxes or anything like that. So everything we get comes on from our customers, towns or the state or the federal government. So
On that very question, given the topsy-turvy nature of federal funding at the moment, what percent of your budgets are dependent on federal money, or those mostly grants, federal grants?
Let's see. Between what we get directly and what's passed through the state to us.
Yes.
Our budget, I would say, is almost 2/3 federal.
Yeah, that's concerning. So as after we get through the Act 181, I think we do need to at some point address what we do.
I'll just follow that up. I was wondering if Catherine's number was going to be different than mine, but I would have said about the same thing.
Yeah.
The one piece is we're peeling apart some of those initiatives at the federal level. At least what we're getting from the agency so far is a distinction between where there's formula grants that have been legislated by Congress versus discretionary grants, where they kind of give money to the administration with the discretion to issue. So like transportation funding is a big chunk.
Yes.
But that is formula. Like that's formula to the state DOT, and there's formula, like we happen to be an MPO, that's in formula. So that funding, it seems to be more secure, or folks have more confidence that it can't be as immediately influenced. Of course, it will get influenced the next time they take up the transportation bill. So we'll see where that goes. But
I know we don't want to go too far down this road, but I'll give you one great example. At Northwest Regional Planning Commission, we have a brownfields cleanup revolving loan fund, which requires us to, when we grant or loan funds to a project, we draw funds down from the EPA and then we provide those funds to the recipient. There's a project in St. Johnsbury that's about ready to break ground because we serve the whole northern part of the state with our loan fund. There's a project that's about to break ground. We're meeting with them later in this week to try to figure out how to now operate within this realm, because we don't want to take on a $300,000 liability that we may not get paid for. And there's just uncertainty about that, which is now impacting a really
Which
great redevelopment project right before.
Which has a heavy brownfield component. Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's,
I didn't want to take you down that rabbit hole,
Yeah,
but
no.
that R and Emma are very focused
Yes.
on,
Yeah.
it's the reality.
yeah, and part of why I'm including brownfield in our housing bill, as we start our discussions at Friday, we're having committee discussion. Components we're hopeful to having it in brownfields are a key piece, and I
Absolutely.
think we need more in there.
Yeah, and this is, the graphic is just to give you a sense of, kind of the range of federal funder, or, I'm sorry, state and federal funders. And also we do get, some town dues. Those typically range around the 5-7% at most of our budgets. But it does help in terms of providing some match, to some of these other grant programs. And kind of all of this is in service to the municipalities, to follow through on things that they've been asked to do or want to do. Economic community development, just to kind of, from last year, we track everything that we do. And so we, as a aggregated number, helped 126 towns with economic development work last year.
Right.
And there's kind of a neat example, in the Northeast Kingdom in Albany, where our peer MBDA, helped the town develop a town plan, created a designated village center, the tax credits that are associated with that, when they did EPA brownfields assessment. And so it now turned into their, center general store. And so, and give you that example of like, it's the planning, it's the tax credits, it's the grants, it's brownfields cleanup. So we're kind of really the only organization that can stick with a project. This probably took years, and there may have been select board turnover, planning commission turnover, that we try to provide that kind of consistency for the towns and help get these longer term efforts done. Planning and zoning, we helped 188 towns last year with either the plans or zoning, and there's some aggregator numbers which are hopefully close to the numbers that you so most towns have have municipal plans. Most have zoning. And she gave you, I think, a more critical number maybe for this Act 181 conversation is zoning and subdivision, which was like 150 instead of 200. Just that's kind of the state of planning and zoning in our town. And then we also in the last few years have been doing
Just
more.
before you leave planning and zoning,
Yes.
we have consistently supported financially your continued bylaw assistance.
Yeah.
Are we giving up on the 17 municipalities that still have no bylaws? I know most of it was for updating bylaws, but what are we doing about towns with no bylaws? Are we?
I don't have any of those towns. So I'm gonna stick quiet.
So we have two. One just adopted their very first town plan, which was very
That's
exciting.
that's very exciting.
Very exciting. Frankly, they have no interest in zoning bylaws. And so because there was so much work to be done in the communities that aren't interested and willing.
Yeah.
That's where we're focusing right here.
Great.
If there's ever a local interest in it, we are there. We're there. So we have phone call.
Housing development may send them right to you. I guess my question is should be in terms of your ask, usually in the last couple of years, it's been for additional help on bylaw modernization. I think, are we okay with that where we are at the moment, or is that one of your asks and one of the pieces?
I think we support additional funding through the municipal planning grant program.
Okay.
That enables municipalities to
Great.
chart their course on that.
Can I, just to clarify, I think that means this will come up in the property transfer tax conversation, because we had a little bit of an adder last year for the formula for all of this. And so we'll need to make sure that it's sufficiently covered in that transfer, depending on if I think Senator Kitchell had preferred to make it a one-time addition rather than any specific change to the formula. So it'll just be a conversation about what that amount is.
Thomas, did you have something?
Nope.
Okay, great.
And I apologize, I only know half the story because there's two pieces to
Yeah.
that, the regional planning fund and the municipal planning grant program. The regional planning fund, the governor's recommended continue that level of funding.
Okay.
And the municipal plan, I'm just trying to rack my brain, see if I can probably find it later.
It's just something to flag.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely check the proposed budget. I think it had more in there. So,
Governor's recommendation, that's great, thanks.
and then you funded Housing Navigators also for us to do some Housing Navigator work over the last couple of years. I think that's ending
Ended.
or ended in December, but just to give you a sense, about 100 towns got help with that. Kind of highlighted down the bottom here, Rhode Island RPC produced a housing resource guide where they kind of pulled in all kinds of different resources to one, and they've been getting very good feedback from even property owners trying to do accessory dwelling unit to small developers trying to build. So we are trying to help on multiple fronts beyond just the regulatory side.
So, well, the navigators. The navigators were, from what I heard, incredibly helpful. Are you going to have an ask in for us to continue the funding for that? Or is that going to come out of money from the PTA?
We had not yet talked about doing that, honestly. I mean, I think given the broader economic situations,
Yes, but if housing is being developed more readily because people are able to be shepherded through the process, particularly people like with ADUs and VHIT, perhaps,
Yeah, right.
who aren't necessarily full-time developers who know what they're doing. Navigators were, I believe, quite helpful.
Yeah, and I think continuing to support this type of program does help. Anything that we can do to help smooth off the rough edges in the system. There's a lot to get through.
I just think we're asking the wrong question, which is what did people need help with?
Yeah.
And how do we make that much clearer and easier? So, I mean, I like to create, solutions that solve the problem and then devolve. Yeah. I mean, my God. So I just hope that I want to have in this A&R liaison or whatever the office that's supposed to help people get through permits, similarly to the healthcare advocate, not to tell us, we did an X number of things, but these things are not working or not clear to people. Fix them.
Yeah. And if I may, one of the things that Addison County Regional Planning Commission and the Northwest Regional Planning Commission did with the Housing Navigator funds is we did an ADU and duplex pilot project where we entertained applications for folks who wanted to do an accessory dwelling unit or a duplex. We offered technical assistance. We offered contractor assistance. We offered a matching grant if they went through VHIT. We started with 15 really interested parties and we're down to 3. And Addison had a similar experience. So when we've gone through that process within the next 4 to 5 months with those applicants, we're going to do like a lessons learned, like what are the barriers to the ADU development? What are the barriers to duplex that get in the way of people being able to do that?
Yeah.
And so to help
Thank you.
We would love to hear
And I would love
the
to
results of
tell
the
you.
conversation.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, we are all about reducing barriers.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Someone yesterday at the Stone Crop Meadows groundbreaking said, I'm in an HOA that doesn't allow ADUs. I think we should look at HOAs and restrictions on housing this year. It's in my
And
thing.
the stormwater.
yeah.
We got a lot of HOA issues.
Yeah.
Sadly not, but
I
All right.
think that's
Sorry.
definitely an issue.
We didn't really come to talk about policy, but can't help ourselves. So I know as you're working on this, and these are kind of generic at the moment, but the funding and financing for infrastructure and to support affordable housing still a need. I just had a meeting with a lot of my public works folks this morning, and the issue of the water and sewer investments came up again as where they're going to need help.
and to that end, you're, I assume, supportive of Spark or our play space.
I haven't digested the details, but I think the general concept, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, anything that brings more funding and financing tools to play is helpful. The second area you already touched on this morning, the permit appeals, and that risk of just, having one neighbor without a lot of merit in the appeal process be able to hold something up for months or years. It's still, I don't think we're still in the middle of the pack from a national standpoint about how easy it is to do appeals with. So there's definitely more work to be done there. And I'm not sure, I think we need to be asking the front end question, like what is the basis for the appeal? Not just the back end, like how many people does it take to appeal or how fast does the appeal get processed? We got to look at the thresholds, and how easy it is to meet those. And then third topic you already talked about too, stormwater, but other permitting requirements that are related within DEC. I know the governor's proposal has wetlands addressed. We think stormwater probably, and I don't know that there's a major issue there, but it probably just needs to get looked at to get confirmation that it can deal with the green fields. I think it's probably very good at dealing with, but when we're doing redevelopment and infill, the dynamics get different, and the same stormwater solutions don't work. Or maybe even the same standards are not there. And the State Historic Preservation Office also just want to make sure that they're lined up in supporting development and not creating unnecessary barriers. Sorry, I hate to.
No,
This isn't anything that we haven't told the State Historic Preservation Office or DEC. So it's not surprising to them. And then, so I'm going to turn it over to Catherine in 1 minute just to start the 181 conversation, the 2024 housing and Act 250 bill. Katie showed you the exemptions are out there. That is a statewide map. If you have this digitally, hopefully these links work. But so we are starting from those interim exemption areas, and it was good working with the Land Use Review Board staff, or NRB at the time, maybe, and ACCD and the digital services. I probably had their name wrong for the state, but they did a great job in getting this map together and making sure it was consistent with the legislation. We were required as part of the act to develop more detailed guidance on each of the future land use types. So we did produce that in December and provided that to the Land Use Review Board and ACCD and others. And we have been participating in the trainings that Pete mentioned earlier. And really, this whole thing is about alignment and getting to yes easier. To the senator's point earlier, like, we should be getting to agreement and reducing the amount of debate that's happening about where we're growing or not growing or how much we're growing. And just real generally, all 11 RPCs are on schedule to get done by, at this point, fall 26. These are kind of rough seasonal dates, but just to give you a sense, there's a couple starting up this summer, hoping to get approved. So there's kind of a peak in the winter, spring, next, a year from now, probably. And then it'll slow down to just a couple that will linger later into 26. But everybody's on track and working hard at this, and we'll talk now more about it.
And you're having not just the planning commissions, but the towns engaging.
Let's talk more about how it's happening.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to delve a little bit more into the Act 181 implementation at the statewide level among the RPCs, and then I'll talk a little bit about Northwest Regional Planning Commission as an example to show you a more detailed example of how it's working. So again, as we've talked about, this Act 181 really is bringing 4 planning systems together. The regional planning, we're all going to be doing consistent land use maps. So if we put them together, we'll have a comprehensive statewide picture of what the planned future land use is for the state of Vermont. One of the exciting things about that piece is that not only can it serve as a platform for the Act 250 permitting and the state designation programs, but it also can serve as a policy platform for other things like the transportation design standards that was talked about earlier. So instead of the Agency of Transportation having to reinvent this whole context sensitive design question, they can say, if it's in a village or downtown center, that's the context. If it's in a planned growth area, that's the context. And it's going to be the same statewide. So I'm really excited to see about where this goes next once we're done this part. And then the other really most important planning system that this pulls in is the municipal planning. So when we are working to implement this law, we are working hand in hand with our municipalities, with the local planning commissions, with the select boards to make sure that the maps that we create not only reflect the criteria in statute, which we have to follow, but reflect the desires and interests of the communities that we are working with. So a quick review for Act 250. We do have these district offices, the district environmental commissions. The status quo before Act 181 is that if you have land, if you have zoning and subdivision, you would need an Act 250 permit if you did a commercial project greater than 10 acres. Or you build a housing units of more than 10 or had a 10 lot or more subdivision. So Act 181 really changed that by making it more location focused with the higher thresholds in our areas that are planned for growth rather than that straight threshold, no matter where you are. The Act had some additional regional plan requirements to first make sure that in the local and regional planning that we accommodate a substantial majority of our housing growth, the housing targets that were mentioned earlier within our areas planned for growth, that we equitably distribute the environmental benefits and burdens, and that we do have equitable engagement that involves the opportunity for all people to participate. And then it did make those changes to our future land use element to require these 10 consistent land use categories. That went fast. Sorry, I don't know what I did. Okay. So first I'll touch on housing targets. So the state of Vermont did release housing targets statewide for an overall total, and then those were broken down by the regional planning commission boundaries. So each regional planning commission now has a set of housing targets for our region. So for the Northwest region, which we've circled in red, we have a low target of 2,144 for 2030 and a high of 3,249 for 2030. We are going to take these targets and divide them among the municipalities in our region and say, okay, based on this number, South Hero, your target is this, and St. Albans City, your target is this. The regional planning commissions are each taking a slightly different approach to this to reflect our regional peculiarities, but in general, we're balancing historic growth rates, availability of infrastructure, and the municipalities' land use plans to municipalize this data. As part of our work with our municipalities, this is going to be one of the conversations we're having with them that says, like, if to do your part to help Vermont normalize its housing market, this is what it would mean for your municipality. And that's really what it is. It's a context for the discussions about planning and development.
But where the rubber hits the road,
Yeah.
This is what it really means for.
Yeah.
And if I can add one thing to it, in response to Senator Brock's question, like this is not all one type of housing unit, right?
No.
So in our rural towns, we expect, it'll be predominantly single family. In downtown Burlington, maybe they're doing more apartments, right? But it's going to be the full range, and the legislation does require us to kind of work with the Agency of Commerce, Department of Housing and Community Development to break that down further, so that we all have a better picture. Because sorry, Senator, you were asking about that earlier, like how is this all going to be tracked, and what's the mechanisms to track it are, I will say, getting developed right now. So I don't know when we'll have good data, particularly going backwards. I don't know if we'll ever have great data going backwards, but going forward, I think we're on a much better path to really see what's being done.
One of the things I've been constantly trying to square up in the numbers is once upon a time I heard a statistic that 19% of our housing stock is not up to code or kind of rendered partially or fully uninhabitable. I don't know if people are living in those units and they're just not safe, healthy units for people to be in, if they're blighted. When I share these numbers with people, I try to tell them there's a good percentage in there that's existing housing that just isn't fully habitable. Are we going to have that more clearly identified too? Doesn't our grand list have some sense of what's blighted or what's?
I'm not sure it does.
I'm not sure. I think that the data you're talking about, from my understanding, comes from the census.
Okay.
So And I don't know if that's getting updated on their, annual surveying that they do.
Yeah.
Is that
But-
2020 census?
I don't remember.
It's been part of the
Yeah.
ACS data, American Community Survey
Yeah.
data.
Oh, right.
But I don't even know, and the new administration may stop even doing the ACS data collection.
I did get they involve legislative leaders in that process. So I was heartened to see that we've already been re-engaged as legislative leaders in the census. So hopefully it doesn't fall apart.
Yeah, and I would definitely ask VHFA, who really did the analytical work
Yeah.
behind this.
Yeah.
Because I do think it was it was a factor in the
Mhm.
number.
Yeah, but it was definitely a much smaller percentage of baked in units. I think it was more like the 3 to 4%.
That's what I feel like I'm having a hard time
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah,
understand.
and you're talking about there's another subset of like ones that are.
Like, let's fix
quite
these
up to
up so that we
standard.
don't lose
Yeah, and I
them.
don't know.
Yeah.
And how do we identify them if they're not on the brand? Do you have a question?
I think on the same topic point, I love these targets, and you can't improve what you don't measure. When we do this, people start measuring consistently. It'll start moving us in the same direction. And what I'm questioning is, have we put or assigned any carrots or sticks to these targets, or is that a conversation down the road once we get the measurements in place?
But I think that's a down the road conversation.
Well, I will say there is no stick.
No,
There is no stick, so which is one of the first.
Mhm.
It's one of the first questions we're
Carrots
getting
are
from
pretty good.
because of the way the phrasing of target sounds
Yeah.
like there might be a stick somewhere waiting. And so I know when we've started our conversation, we've had a share. This is really our sense, and please adjust our sense if it's incorrect. Is that when we've been hearing you talk about them as it's been more of a policy goal because you want to get some numbers to be able to track what's happening to decide if you need to make policy changes. And the carrots are, they're tied to development, right?
Right.
Permit carrots and things like that, that don't necessarily directly benefit the town. They're not getting a cash payment, but it's allowing them
Housing
to,
where they might not have.
it's allowing them to grow their brand list.
More
The
students.
grand list
School.
improvement.
Just,
Lots.
and probably I'm saying it this way to prepare you all, like, not all towns care. But not all towns want to have more growth. They moved here to get away from other people or to, just be in the woods, right? And so I know there's going to be more dynamics that are going to be challenging to work through in this.
And when we've mentioned the housing targets to some of our communities, a lot of them are like, yeah, okay. And then some are going to be, yeah, I don't think so.
Right. Like
So-
17 with their bylaw. Keisha.
I just want to celebrate the value of this and and that a lot of communities are hungry for this is the number that isn't outsized and helps us do our part. Yesterday at the Stonecrop Meadows groundbreaking, the chair of the Middlebury Select Board, Brian Carpenter, in his closing speech for the event said, Middlebury's part is 500 units. This is 250. We look forward to the next 250. I wanted to cry.
Yes.
That is,
Yeah.
it's such great work and it's really everybody, but I'm so glad you have this and it's really getting out there. And everybody wants their North Star to say this is a really good goal for the next 5 years. This will help us feel stabilized economically.
And I think it's
Thank
so
you.
helpful. I mean, I think it's so helpful to know, we've taken on X number of houses.
Yeah,
And we're
we're doing our
and we're
part.
doing our
Everybody
part.
wants to feel successful in that way.
And when we look at the numbers, just like a little reality check for the targets, when we started municipalizing the data, such a word, municipalizing, the data, we're looking at, in some communities, a doubling of the housing growth rate. But when I say doubling, I mean, we're going from, 0.5% a year to 1% a year. We're not going from
Right.
15% a year to 30% a year.
Right.
So I think it's not as scary as it
Right.
might seem when you hear this big number of, 30,000 houses statewide. When you actually look at it per community versus what's been happening, it's a change, but it's not a fundamental change.
So really thank you, because I feel like that's what planning at its best is. I feel like, so thank you.
And the state's doing a great job. They've got a new housing dashboard to help track these numbers, and we're making great progress there. All right, so.
The tracking start.
Hmm?
When did the tracking start?
Well, the
tracking, I think their data goes back to. I don't know. I have to look at the.
ACCD or who?
Yeah,
DHCD.
Yeah,
One of the questions when you started this slide was,
yeah.
we aren't really clear on who's tracking.
Yeah, DHCD has developed a new housing tracking and it's available through housingdata.org.
Yeah.
Which is a site that VHFA runs and they've incorporated into that. Additionally, both Chittenden County RPC and Northwest RPC have our own housing dashboard. So ours goes back to 2020, where we track the zoning permits, or in case of our two towns without zoning, the E911 permits, the E911 points from 2020 to 2023. And you can actually look at a map and see where the development has happened each year in each town.
And we have that data in Chittenden County back to 2010, if you're interested in looking at that. But I think the DHCD, sorry, Madam Chair, it's very clear that DHCD is required to track the big numbers.
Right.
And so, I think their first report is like now. They're supposed to have that system to be able to start. And I'm not really sure how far back they feel comfortable that they have good data.
I'll ask Alex tomorrow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he could really talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so a quick review now. Regional plans and our future land use maps. Once we adopt them at the regional level, they're going to the state land use review board. They are going to review our plans to make sure they meet the statute and that they were adopted properly. And then once they approve our regional plans, two things happen. Our maps are used for the new boundaries for the state designation programs, which have been shrunk from 5 to 2. And our maps will serve as the basis for Act 250 jurisdictional boundaries for those communities that choose to opt in. So those are two things that our regional plans did not do before. So I'm really excited about this.
Yeah. No.
And here's just a kind of a flow chart to show how it all works together. So at the top, you would have the regional plan future land use category.
Do you have a question?
Nope.
So the 10 categories across the top. And then as you move down to the state designation and community investment program, we now have those two, the center and the neighborhoods. And you can see downtown centers and village centers are eligible for the center designations, and plan growth areas and village areas are eligible for the neighborhood designations. And then moving down to the next level, you'll see which land use areas are eligible for the different Act 250 tier jurisdictions.
Right.
I'm sure you thought of this. How is this knitting together with our flood resiliency, flood safety work? I just want to make sure we know because it's like top of mind.
Yes, that's a great
That's
question.
a super.
So in two ways, short term, the bill that you passed actually requires that we only include river corridors in these designated areas if the municipality has river corridor regulations. So if a municipality does not have local regulations to manage the river corridors properly, they won't be, that particular swath, like the little ribbon will be left out of the area that's eligible for Act 250 jurisdictional changes.
So that's another carrot.
So that's a carrot.
And that's
for
a
doing
carrot
river
if they
corridor
do that.
bylaws.
River
Yeah.
corridor.
So that is definitely one thing we are very cognizant of. And the other thing is that the planned growth areas and village areas, those designations actually allow us to work with towns to show areas away from the river corridor that they might want to have future growth and development. So
Mhm.
think of a community like Johnson. We're not gonna, Memorial County Planning Commission is just gonna map the traditional village. They're gonna be working with the town to map these areas, like here's where we want to grow instead, because we know we have to stay away from where we have.
So just to tag on to Keisha's question, because one thing we've talked about a bit in this committee is land banks.
Yeah.
Thank you. No, and I'm just curious, are you helping towns develop and think about as they look at land to move development, safer development to? Are you also helping them envision actually investing and purchasing that land so they have it as a bank for development for the future?
I think that Central Vermont RPC and Memorial County Regional Planning Commission are working closely with towns. I don't know if they specifically addressed that particular piece, but I know they're looking at all the tools available.
Right, okay.
Yeah, I
Right.
think, yeah, some towns are farther along in those conversations and others, we probably haven't even started.
Yeah.
So I think that is something that, yeah, it's gonna be
I mean, it's
factored
one
in.
thing to kind of map it and look at it, but then you really, if you're invested in enabling those options, we have to actually.
And if I could offer, one thing that has been crossing my radar that, two things, a couple little concerns. One is the ability to do like, the way it's written right now, a town can't do a new center. So like Montpelier, about that golf course, is that a new center that they're trying to build in Montpelier? And so there maybe need to be some adjustment on being able to do new centers. And the other thing, and actually it's more of a question, does the interim exemption, Pete, maybe you know the answer to this, factor out the floodplain or, okay, it does,
yeah.
okay. So, sorry, I had a moment of panic. I was like, geez, I wasn't sure the interim exemptions were protecting the floodplain.
I assume it does.
It does.
Yeah, okay, good.
Yeah, I have to go back and look to see if each and every one of them does and specifically, but for the most part they do.
And then the other thing that's happening long-term is, I think it's Act 121 last year, the flood safety bill, whatever the number was, the flood safety bill, requires. 120, okay, requires Agency of Natural Resources to do another related to river corridor permitting, floodplain protection, et cetera. And we started at the first meeting yesterday with their working group to figure out how we're going to align their work with our future land use work to make sure that the policies intersect and intertwine when they're done their work. So we're on it.
Yeah, right.
All right, so you talked about the tier, so we're going to skip over that one. So here's a list of the 10 land use categories that we are using for consistently statewide for all the regional planning commissions. So not only will we have the same name, they'll have the same color. We'll be able to knit them together into one picture statewide that shows the future land use as a policy platform.
So we have real hamlets.
Yeah, we do. Yeah,
I want to visit all the hamlets.
a hamlet is like the crossroads, like Enosburg Center, where there's, you want to recognize it because it's important, but it's not really a village.
Oh, they're still referred to in most of our towns as sort of, that's where they live. They don't live in Woodstock, they live in Taftsville.
Yeah, exactly. And some of them are large enough to be like an actual village center, and some of them are really just a crossroads with gas stations.
Right.
We should make a hamlet map.
We're gonna have one.
Oh my
Oh,
God.
great. Oh, good.
And they're
Sorry,
gonna
on
be
the
pointed,
tour.
so you'll be able to just see them.
Maybe have like a hamlet passport.
Oh, I like that.
And after everybody has done 252 towns for
And
the,
they can move on to the
challenge, you might as well get to the hamlets.
I love it. And then we'll argue
Who's
about
in
how many,
charge of
then
that
we can argue about
process?
how many hamlets there are.
All
right.
Yes, we are. at the moment.
Yeah, so I'm gonna just touch on the 4 land use categories that really relate to the center to the designation and incentive program and the activity jurisdictional thresholds. So downtown centers and village centers, as you may guess, these are our areas that are concentrated areas of growth. And one of the things that's really important is that no community that currently has a village center designation is going to lose it. And communities that don't have one are going to be able to get one. And so that's why it's really important that the statute made it clear that village centers to be mapped as one, you don't have to have a plan, you don't have to have zoning, subdivision, or infrastructure. And it's because it's related to that state incentive program. So additionally, around our downtowns, we have what's called a planned growth area. In order to be mapped as a planned growth area, you need to have zoning, subdivision, water or wastewater, and complete streets. So there needs to
There
be
you are.
some method of getting around besides your car. And then village areas are the areas surrounding the village centers, and the requirements there are a little simpler: zoning, subdivision, public water or sewer, or suitable septic soils.
And is this a quarter mile or?
Not
it's
necessarily,
not.
and no, and in the math example, I'll show you, you can see how that's a little different. So to be eligible for tier 1B, which is 50 units of housing or less on 10 acres or less, to be eligible for that jurisdictional change under Act 250. The downtown center, village center, planned growth area, or village areas, the municipalities have to opt in. So the select board has to say, yes, we want that exemption in place in our communities. And they have to have adequate staff to manage their local regulations. The regional planning commissions are, for the adequate staff piece, are asking municipalities to self-certify that piece. Yes, we're confident we have adequate staff. And regional planning commissions are available for technical assistance to back them up should they get an application before they go, I don't know. And that happens even before Act 181, where they're back up.
Yeah, they might contract with their RPC to provide that sound.
Yeah, we're actually the zoning administrator for 2 towns, so that's already good. Okay, so how that relates to the new state designations, there's now 2 instead of 5. So village centers and downtown centers, once our maps are approved by the Land Use Review Board, are going to become centers in this new state designation program. Once our maps are approved, planned growth areas and village areas are going to become neighborhoods. And they are, both of these 2 areas are eligible for a different level of incentives. The centers have a greater number of incentives attached to them than the neighborhoods. But the benefit of this, which I'll show you in a map in a minute, is that we now have a greater geography that's going to be eligible for some form of state incentives. And municipalities don't have to take on the burden of the application process and the renewal process. And when I met with St. Albans City about this, they were, yes, no more growth center renewals. They were so happy.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it'll just be on, you'll have it for forever.
Yeah. So the maps are changed. Yeah.
Right.
All right, so here's an example I wanted to show you that's gonna kind of bring it all together. This is a zoomed in map of
Thank you,
Fairfax,
Sarah.
which is Fairfax Village. The Loyal River goes through the middle, or the edge of Fairfax Village. The big white line in the middle is Route 104.
Gosh, that's a piece of art we could actually put up.
So one of the things I just mentioned is that the areas eligible for incentives grows. So in Fairfax in particular, right now, you have the black hash mark in the middle of the maroon. That is what's currently its designated village center. That is 59 acres. That is the only place in town that's eligible for the state incentive programs. Once this map is finalized, we're meeting with the town tonight, actually. Once this map is finalized and the Land Use Review Board approves our plan, the whole dark maroon area will be a center. And the whole light pink fuchsia area
Oh, great.
will be
Oh
a
my God,
planned
that's
growth
so
area.
exciting.
So we will go from, in Fairfax, 59 acres being eligible for the state incentive programs to 417. And that's just based on this map. The numbers will, are going to shift a little bit, but that gives you an order of magnitude of what this new system is going to do to our communities in terms of state incentive programs.
That is.
That's right.
Okay, sure.
I celebrate all of this. I am trying to get my mind focused on what is working in the communities that want to do this. And Charlie knows some of our communities have had big debates about what we meant by along water and sewer, for example. And, I got to the point where I realized we probably do have to re-emphasize our intent. Because I don't want to speak for the legislature at some of these meetings or, see costly litigation over things that I think we knew what we meant when we were doing them. But I think we're going to need your help figuring out how to learn from what's happened these last 2 years in places where there has been a question about what we meant and revisit our intent with new language.
Or to ask someone to clarify for us what isn't clear.
Well, we should probably hear at least some of the legal interpretation that's come out of some of these cases.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I think, to the good in terms of what I think we meant, but I don't want to see this relitigated everywhere. So we should try to take some of the outcomes of these lawsuits and make them concrete.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
And some of this is rooted back in Act 47, which is more, that's really
Okay. I'm like,
focused
I don't
on-
even know what Act 47 is.
Sorry, the Home Act,
So we all call it the home act.
in the Home Act.
I'm bad with numbers.
Thank you.
That's why I gave
I
it
prefer
to
not to use those Act numbers either because I don't remember them except for 3, I guess.
Yes.
Well, I
But,
remember home act.
But in the Home Act, there, this debate happened a bit and there wasn't a great way to land that conversation. And so there was some discretion left to the towns about, you have some discretion about how to define your sewer service area.
Mhm.
And, that's now playing out on the ground. And I know, not to mention any specific towns, but I'm pretty sure I know who you're talking about. We're going to get dragged as the RPC into some of these more local conversations as we try to finalize these maps.
Yeah,
And so, I had I could say this, so like one of the Richmond select board members was like, oh, thank God you're going to have this conversation with us because we've been kind of like going this way and that way a little bit about where we should grow or not grow.
Right.
And this is going to help us land.
right. And these
place.
are people I'm talking to also,
Yeah.
where I think it is fair that there's a legislative re-up of what we truly meant,
Mhm.
and that we also build in some flexibility, because they're not happy when I say like, well, that's a really interesting question. Like what would be the right thing to do? And I'm actually really glad in Shelburne, and I've said this because he's my neighbor, but one of the select board members basically said, I'd really rather we not get into just an argument about what legislators meant and what this bill means, but like, is this the right thing to do?
Exactly, yeah. Exactly.
Do not be happier. And so I want to find that balance of what did we mean and how do we help them just have the flexibility to do the right thing in that framework.
So to take that to an actionable item, who do we ask to identify what needs to be further clarified? Could we ask you for that? Because our time is short.
Are you
We're-
asking us for next session?
Well,
I don't think I could come up with an answer on that, because we're just
in
starting
my-
these conversations.
I'm drafting it, and we'll just need I just want to make sure we're on the same page, that we are all having these conversations where there's some cleanup to do.
Right.
So that we can have these beautiful maps.
Okay, that's, I think, what we need, is if you could help us clarify areas that we've identified that are,
We're happy to look at it. Right.
And also just as we all go through these deeper conversations with every town, dollars to donuts, next session, we're gonna have we learned a lot.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Especially we have that collection of RPCs that are going now. We're gonna learn a lot about how this is working and where questions are.
Yeah.
And you may hear a lot.
Yeah.
As we go through that.
So the other thing I wanted to point out on this map,
but we have about just
yeah,
about
that's
8
why,
minutes
that's why
left.
I'm
So
cruising through, because I'm almost done. The red line, the red circle, that's the interim Act 250 exemption area. So you can see, quarter of a mile was a great starting point. That was we needed something to start right now. It's a quarter mile buffer around the existing designated village. And you can see it encompasses a lot of what we hope to include in the long term, but it also, it includes this large river corridor that is in that quarter mile. So
which is only exempt if it has.
yeah, so this is just drawing the quarter mile, the actual maps you look at
Right.
on what's actually exempt is gonna look a little bit different because of that. And so not every area that's included in the interim is useful developable land. And it missed some of the areas that we want to include. So it was a great starting point, but it just, order of magnitude, it's probably about the same size. It's just a little bit.
And it was really helpful to have the interim exemptions because it's already
Yeah.
that part of the conversation.
Oh,
And now when we
and
go,
getting project.
right,
Yeah.
and now when we go meet with towns, we're not, although it's people refer to it as opt-in, really the way I'm talking about it is you have interim exemptions in place now. Do you want those to continue?
Yeah.
And that's really the conversation because these interim exemptions have been in place. The sky hasn't fallen yet.
Right. Well,
So they mean for your community going forward. So that's an example in Fairfax, kind of zoomed into the village.
Can I, one more
Yeah.
question on that?
Yeah.
What is a transitional area? Cause was
It's
that my thing? Was that my my thing? The road thing?
that's your road thing, honey. Except
that-
it does
that
look
is-
like it's overlaid in the forest, which I don't fully understand.
So
Oh,
the
no, that's just dark green.
the transition area is those areas where a lot of it is the existing strip development areas that,
Okay.
you know, we're gonna transition to more densely developed
Mhm.
with infill. That could potentially, be a plain growth area in the future.
Okay.
It can also include those areas where a community is planning to grow where nothing exists now, like, like a Johnson example. Or, it could include an area that, is, although I think this is gonna be really rare, an area that has development now where the community is hoping for it to go less developed in the future.
Okay.
Thank you for, yeah.
We'll be moving.
And
More
then
to follow.
I just wanted to show you kind of an order of magnitude picture of what a rural community might look like. This is the town of Sheldon in our region. And I just wanted you to see like the three rural categories on the bottom: rural conservation, rural agriculture and forestry, and rural general. Just to give you a sense of, in a community like Sheldon, only a small amount of it, the darkest green, is the rural conservation. And that's based primarily on where there are floodplains and river corridors, endangered
Right.
species, critical habitat, or places that the town plan is designated as protection areas, which is the case in some of these darker green spaces with the town forest and other areas. So I just wanted to give you a picture of what a rural area might look like. And these land use categories, the rural areas, the goal isn't no growth, even in the rural conservation, but the goal of these areas is that if you do have any growth in conservation, for example, it needs to be respectful of the resources that are important in that area. So it's an important balance that land use areas are really what's the thing you need to think about first in those land use areas. And then the conservation, for example, you think about conservation, what's important to conserve, and you develop in ways that respect that.
Right.
So a quick example of how a timeline might work. We are right now doing the draft maps in-house based on statute and town plans, and then we're meeting with municipalities. We've been doing that in earnest. We're met with a bunch of select boards. Now we're doing all the planning commissions, and we'll be doing at least one meeting with all of them.
So all the town select boards are clear on this time frame.
I haven't gotten to all of them yet.
I met with all of ours.
I mean,
just.
All 252.
No.
Because everybody's on different timelines. Some
Yeah.
regions haven't started yet, so.
Like Two Rivers isn't planning to do their Act 180 work until, this,
Yeah. It's okay, we got it.
Yeah.
Act 181.
until they're adopting they were already in the process of adopting their regional plan. They're trying to finish it up this month, I think. And then they'll start the 181 work. So they probably haven't really had these conversations with their select boards yet. They're on the lagging.
I know who to push on that, so we need to be moving.
But
ahead.
that doesn't mean there haven't been communications about what's coming, because, and so like, for example, I don't know all the select boards yet, but we've had a training for local officials. We have newsletter articles, we have emails directly. I've met with the managers and administrators. So there's a lot of work going on to lay the groundwork for this. We hope to finish a meeting with our communities to get them in a place of comfort with the maps and the housing targets. And then we'll have our draft regional plan in the late summer, early fall. Then we'll submit it to the land use review board for their approval. The adoption process about 6 months just to do the adoption. So we have to plan that into our schedule.
6 months for the LURB or 6 months?
6 months total from the 60-day advance notice to the land use review board all the way up to the board adoption and the LURB review.
What is rural general? What does that mean?
Rural general, it's basically what you're talking about, where people might want to go and live, where they've got a little bit of space from their neighbors.
Can we talk the loose board, like land use loose board? Just gonna call it
The use board.
Well, I like it. I like.
You know what?
anything that
That is not a bad idea. Anyway, we can. Okay. All right. Charlie and Catherine, finish up.
So
Yeah.
last, I want to touch on engagement because it's crucially important.
Yeah.
One of the really fun things about this process is that if you've ever seen this public engagement spectrum from informing the public
Yeah.
to empowering the public.
IAP too.
I love it.
This project has something for every box. So, we are informing the public through flyers and websites and newsletter articles and Facebook posts. We are going to have open houses and comment boxes to consult with the public. Municipal officials are involved because we're meeting with them. We're collaborating with them on the plan and the land use map and housing target development. And then finally, municipal officials are empowered because they get to choose whether to opt in to the Act 250 jurisdictional changes. So it hits the whole spectrum, and we're trying to make sure we are really thoughtful about the engagement plan. So everyone has the opportunity to participate either by coming to us, or more importantly for us going to them.
Right, very exciting.
And then that's the overall schedule one more time. There, did it.
That's terrific. I think this was really helpful. I think we're all grateful.
Thank you for all the work
Wonderful.
that this committee did last year. That was a lot.
A lot.
What it was, do you have a final thought?
I have a final thought and it's 11:59.
You have a minute.
Just creative ways to bring in voices of the unhoused into that process. I mean, if you're doing it, great. If you could do it, I mean, really, we should be getting better, and we should be using it as a challenge to innovate, to bring in stakeholders, advocates, but also unhoused folks themselves to this conversation, because they are the voice that is not heard in this process.
There's a lot of those, yeah, and we're spending, as you might imagine, as the most diverse and the region with the most amount of people in poverty. We're spending a lot of time on how to get to folks that don't normally come to public meetings. And it's interesting. I don't know that we specifically have unhoused on that list. So
Yeah,
We can figure that out.
I would love to work on that
Yeah.
with you.
And
Yeah,
I think
so-
there's
So
certainly
it's
places
leadership.
to convene.
Yes.
Great. Thank you.